All right. Welcome, everyone, back to Limping for Jesus. I'm your host and pastor, Mike Matthews. I have today a special interview episode. I had Nathan Blake with me. He's a writer, teacher, organizer from Wheeling, West Virginia, where he helped to seed the Appalachian Order. I probably slaughtered that. Sorry. Um, which is a diverse national community of new monastics following a spiritual path of welding wonder, resistance, and redemption. All right, you're gonna have to get more into that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about you know where you're at ministry wise, and tell me about your what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So, where I am at ministry wise, I always tell people that, when people always say, like, oh, who do you really associate with in scripture? And people are like, oh, I'm a David, or I'm a Ruth, or I'm an
Yeah.
Esther, or I'm a Peter. And I'm like, oh, I'm Jonah. Like, I'm
Yeah.
Jonah. I've spent a lot of my life running ministry adjacent. I felt a calling early on in my life, and chose to do other things. Not that those things weren't important in the community, not that they weren't important in general, and I think God has used them in a lot of ways, but certainly running from the work that I felt called to do. So I am currently at 44 years old, in the middle of seminary. You and I go way back. I've led a couple of house churches in my 20s to varied success. Um, uh, had my ups and downs in life,
Mm.
and come out on the other side. And God is faithful and He is true. The Appalachian Order. I mean, I think you did fine pronouncing that, except that it's Appalachian and not
Yeah,
uh,
I knew
Appalachian.
I knew I Pennsylvanian that.
That, you guys don't want to claim that Appalachian heritage, but Pittsburgh is the Paris of Appalachia. No, so the Appalachian Order came about because I'm a terribly undisciplined person spiritually. And I was endeavoring to create a rule of life for myself. Um, you know, uh, Spiritual practices and rhythms for myself. I wanted those. I had read a book by a Native American, an indigenous theologian, where he really was talking about tying how much of their faith is tied to the land and where they're from. And I thought that was really fascinating. And I started to think about what that would look like for Appalachia. Specifically, I'm from, uh, we're on the Ohio River northern plateau of Appalachia, which is
Yeah.
like a mixture of steel and coal. It's industry and agriculture, everything slammed together by this river. So I started looking and thinking about what that meant for a redeemed Appalachian spirituality, and I came up with 5 characteristics, and I was kind of sharing them with some people, some friends of mine on Twitter, and friends of mine from the community we attend in Washington, PA, your way, out your way, and they were like, "Wow, that is really interesting and really good. Like, could we do this thing with you?" And I was like, I guess there's no reason you can't. I mean, it made it a little bit bigger because now there has to be like rules and guidelines, whereas for me, it's just I do whatever I want to do. So I had to put it down on paper, but that was a good practice too. So,
Now,
it's pretty.
is
Go
it
ahead.
a church plant or is it
Yeah. I
or
don't know. That's a good question. I don't know what it's going to be. Right now, it's a group of like I think there's probably 6 to 8 of us that are doing it like consistently. We have a Discord server. We talk over things. We encourage each other. We pray for each other. We take the Eucharist once a week, not necessarily together because we're spread out. Um, we fast once a week. We say a modified daily rhythm of prayers from the the Celtic Daily Prayer Book, modified hours. Right now, it is a group of us walking, and one of my big things in general, and this is kind of a change because I can talk theology all day, is when I looked at the early church, there was this huge focus on orthopraxy over orthodoxy, right? Like our spiritual habits and our spiritual lives and what we do should impact our what we believe and not the other way around. I think we're upside down. I think we spend a lot of time talking about the heady stuff and not a whole lot of time practicing it, getting into the dirt. And I'm trying to flip that upside down. So right now it's kind of very organic. I have a feeling that in the Wheeling, Washington area, we'll probably start holding like a monthly Saturday night service, like a Shabbat service.
Yeah.
Sometime this year, but that is still, it's kind of like a desire that I've seen in the community, and the people that are practicing, but I haven't put that together yet, because I don't really have, when I did the interview for seminary and they were like, where do you see yourself in like 10 years? And I was like, I don't know, but if I'm behind the walls of a church my whole life, I'm going to die. Like I'm,
Yeah.
me, I've always been much more comfortable out in the streets.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Now, I get the reason why I want to have you on the show is because of your wide range of ministry experience, and a lot of it has been unorthodox, per se. I always tell people when you guys ordained me back in 2010, I always tell my story of a kid with a bloody foot in my face while I'm giving my ordination sermon. So I was like that was not your normal Baptist path to ordination, but like my heart for doing this ministry, doing LFJ, is to tell that person who's hurting from church hurt or whatever, like there's a better way to do faith community, and the lot of traffic that we get here and the messages we get are people saying, I was done with church, I found this page, you sound like a pastor that's been through stuff. Like, what do you think overall? I don't want to lump the whole American church into a bag, but what do you see as a main problem with why people are not connecting with traditional brick and mortar faith communities?
Oh man, we could talk all day on that, right? I do
I know, that's
a lot.
That's a pretty wide.
That's a pretty wide net. Yeah. I spend a lot of time thinking about this, actually. I spend a lot of time thinking about systems and community and building community. I think that you have to like do one separation first, and that's separating American evangelicalism from mainline churches. I think those are two very like distinct ways, and I think both of them have their problems, and I think they both have things that they're doing well. I think when people talk about the American church, though, they're generally talking about American evangelicalism.
Yes.
I think that that's usually what people are talking. If we're talking in that, and I just want to like lay like a very clear disclaimer before I say anything. I have wonderful brothers and sisters. I am not one of those who, although I may speak against things I see in those spaces, things that I think are problems, I have wonderful brothers and sisters out of there. I don't think that it is completely toxic. I think there are good people doing good work in those spaces that are necessary in their communities. Sometimes
I try to make it clear with people, like, when I advocate for an issue on LFJ or anything, that I'm not attacking solid pastors.
Well, it's very trendy right now. It's very trendy in this in deconstruction, and I think deconstruction is really important. But I think that it's very trendy to just want to throw the whole thing out, and I don't know that that's it. Like it or not, it's a reflection of American culture and who we are. It's a mirror on ourselves, and that can be useful. So, and I guess I'll segue there. Like, I think that the main issue that I have or that I see with it is that it's just so hyper individualized. And it's really in that vein, really consumeristic. It's about what we get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
We approach church with an attitude of, does this meet my needs? Is this what I'm looking for? Is this is what's right for me? Do I feel welcome? Um, do I feel like this makes me feel good? Right? When I think a lot of the church, and there's just, we just have so many of them that we can ask those questions. I think that generally speaking, we just have a church that is so entitled and so used to getting their own way and being
Yeah.
relevant
Yeah.
that if we don't like something, we can just go somewhere else.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so we never mature. We never move beyond, the milk, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's it. I mean, I think there's a ton of other issues systematically, leadership, the way they structure, all kinds of things. But I think if you really boil it down, I think that, and I would say it's coupling with American nationalism, like with American politics, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
is the other big one.
Yeah. Like the terminology that I learned, because I have a 14-year-old kid and I tried to stay up on trends that you pastor and me. It's like I heard a young couple Christians say that the American church has main character syndrome.
Yeah,
And I
yeah, it
feel like
does.
I feel like that problem is also an American culture issue. We think it's all about us. Like we're the apple of God's eye.
Hmm.
Like like when
We're
I
New
when
Israel,
I when
right?
I try to disciple people and I say things like the Bible is for us, but it's not to us, they get
Yeah.
offended. They get
Oh
offended.
yeah.
They get offended when I
Well,
say
it attacks their identity.
yeah, when I say things like, it's a Middle Eastern book for Middle Eastern people, and we're on the
Hmm.
sidelines watching, they get offended.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
during the whole, a couple weeks ago, and this mindset impacts your whole theology. Just a couple weeks ago with the eclipse and people
Hmm.
looking for signs of the end times. I can't believe I have to tell Christians this that Kentucky's not in the Bible.
Hmm.
And and it's like they look for a purpose. They look like they want to be a special class that get
Hmm.
beamed up in the rapture. I
Hmm.
I, I just I don't I don't know if you're someone that is hurting that you can get lost in that mix. You know,
Hmm.
being part of several churches, different sizes. No, like being part of a multi-site campus or something, like you can get lost really
Yeah.
quick. And if people in that community don't you need to reach out, and if you don't feel loved or seen, it don't matter what the pastor teaches.
Hmm.
And I that's the one of the big things that I see with a lot of the American church is um they tell you come as you are, but
Hmm.
they back off when you do. So I don't like in your context. I remember when we were younger, I used to get mad at you when your theology was just love. I was like, what
Hmm.
the? I used to be like, what the hell does that mean? Like,
Hmm.
like I used to leave our meetings or whatever, and I'd be like, well, what does that mean? Like, uh, because theologies are all over the place. Like, if you could tell a church or a pastor, like, how to keep people in your circle or your
Hmm.
community, what would you say?
Yeah. Hey, I mean, that's when I came back to my faith. I remember I was in Mexico and I was sitting I woke up in the middle of the night from a dream, and I remember just feeling this call back to Jesus. And I just said, like, I can't do it. I can't live up to all of these things I've been taught that I have to do. And that's what came to me, was this idea of just loving. And I still lean on that today. I think that, to your question there, now I articulate it as um, and it's part of what's one of our five tenets in the Appalachian Order, is to stress relationship over rightness, right? If you and I are in relationship and we're in a debate or an argument, and it gets to the point where those differences are impacting our ability to be in relationship, then I think you need to, we're not talking about trauma, we're not talking about abuse, we're not talking about situations that are like harmful, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about just you and I talking and having differences. And I think we live in such a polarized world that people have a really hard time doing that. We really want to be right. And as I've, my mid 30s to my 40s, like I really believe with all of my heart that most of the work that we do is so long term. Sometimes we're planting seeds, sometimes we're the harvesters, sometimes, we're just cultivating. And what's really important are those relationships. So I would just tell people that understand that, some people are converted right away, but the statistics say that a lot of them happen over long periods of time of slowness. And if you cut that relationship off, you get no voice for the rest of that journey, versus
Mm.
just understanding that people are on a journey along the way. I mean, you and I have both been through divorces. And sometimes there's things that you want to say, and I don't know if you've had the opportunity to administer to people going through it after you, but there are times you want to say, like, oh no, like, you just need to do this right now. But that's not where they're at. They
Yeah.
can't hear that right then.
Yeah. I
Um,
couldn't. I mean, I know there were people trying to reach me during that,
mhm,
like, tell me to keep going, tell me to whatever. But, you know, it took me 2 years
mhm.
to really look back and be like, oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
I see what I could have said or did to help someone now. Like,
Yeah. I tend to just tell people there's light, right? Like, I just
mm,
want you to know that whatever you're feeling right now, there's going to be light on the other side of this.
mm,
And that's hard for people to hear too, but at least it's not telling them what they should be doing or
mm,
what they should be feeling, because that's their journey. And I think the Jewish religion and faith has this wonderful idea of like sitting shiva, right? Like
mm.
just sitting with people when they're grieving and just being present, and not, you're not there to counsel them or do anything. You're just there to be present. And I've
Yeah,
really
like
I've
Joe's
really taken
friends,
that.
like
Yeah.
Joe's friends. The first couple of days they were cool.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, right.
like
Yeah.
I mean, I gotta be honest. Back then, I want to talk about a couple of church hurt, but uh, back then, what really drove me out from the so-called flock during that period was when people were telling me, things like, you shouldn't, as a divorced pastor, you shouldn't really be at this small group right now because we don't want
Mm.
your pain to become its identity.
Mm.
That, like, I don't know, like, trying to be objective about it, I don't know. The one thing I knew to do was run to my faith family,
Mm.
and I did that. And what I heard, because I was already triggered by rejection hurt, was you're not, you don't belong here. Like, you had
Mm.
this red, uh, you know, you had this scar, this letter on you now. And I ran. I mean, I ran. Like, I let my hurt and my pain push me out the
Mm.
door, but it was opened.
Mm.
It was open for me.
Mm.
And like you said, like, I just wish like more churches would uh no matter what anyone's story is, it could be loss of child, loss of spouse, cancer, disease,
Hmm.
whatever. Like, give people a safe place to
Yeah.
figure life out, to figure it out,
Yeah.
to know that I think that the one thing that helped me kind of like refired my faith journey after that is God had to show me uh I can still help hurting people. And
Hmm.
that during that time people who were hurting reached out to me, and it triggered, like, I remember like my gifts and my calling are still
Hmm.
there. Uh God didn't change. His heart towards me didn't change, but it took me a couple of years to get back there for sure.
Yeah, and then the things that I've gone through in my life, like I look back at social media posts and stuff, and you're like, oh God, that was so. I mean, to use like you used 14-year-old language, like it's just so cringy. Like, oh,
Mhm,
I hate looking at that stuff. But
mhm,
that's where I was, and it was just so raw, and I was just looking for anything to latch onto.
yeah,
Um, I think I heard or read this amazing thing, and it was talking about worship. And, I talked about like one of the problems we have is this individualized idea. And sometimes I think that manifests itself in our communities that we always want to play up the positive, right? Like, our worship is always praise filled and happy and joyful, and joy comes in the morning. And we forget that, what do you do? But so much of scripture talks about even sin and repentance in this very communal aspect. Um, Not just, I mean, it's certainly an individual component, but looking at a much more community wide vantage point. And I think the point of this person, whoever it was talking about, was, what do you do when somebody is grieving? What do you do when they lose a child? What do you do when there is a key divorce, or there's just a grieving process happening? Like, why as communities do we not tailor our services, and allow that person and that is hurting in that moment to approach the throne of God as a griever, and
mhm,
not only allow the music and the message and the liturgy or whatever you want to have in your particular stream of faith, like, but not only allow them to do it, but then to say, as a community, we are going to collectively approach the throne of God with you as grievers.
mhm,
Even though our life might be going well, but because you're our brother, because you're our sister, and one of the other characteristics of the Appalachian Order is solidarity and suffering. Like, if somebody is suffering, we are all suffering until that person is made whole again. Um,
yeah,
and for me, that's something that if I do have another, if whatever I'm doing turns into a church or a community, I don't think whatever I do would ever look like a normal traditional church, but whatever that looks like, I hope that it can adopt those. And surely on any given day, you're going to have some people grieving, and it's hard to, but I'm talking about very key moments where there's an elephant in the room that this person has really gone through something. Why can't we as a community come around them and experience that together so that they feel supported and surrounded and safe in those moments?
yeah. The one of the things that I always think about is how Jesus kicks off the Sermon on the Mount and how he tells us the poor in spirit
Mm-hmm.
go and hear everything. And I feel like to be vulnerable in church and to share that you are the poor in spirit,
Mm-hmm.
it's scary for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 I'm just not saying this from, I'm saying this from everyday person in your pew to your leaders and your elders. Like, we're all afraid. There's a part of us that is afraid to let you see me
Mm-hmm.
for who I really am. And when I talk to people, when I collect these stories, that the reason why they do walk away from organized religion is they did show people who they were, and
Hmm.
their hurt was
Yeah.
multiplied.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's no answers for that. Like this is a problem that's been in the American church or church in general.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I really feel like churches and communities that thrive, they get that they do that co uh that suffering and solidarity. They get that,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
they're on their way of grasping that.
And I think that historically, that's one of the reasons I really love uh, house churches or smaller churches or third spaces that have, discipleship or those types of things. Is I think it's much easier to live that out in small community than it is
Mm,
larger communal. Yeah, I don't have any issue with large churches. I think some of them do it better than others.
mm,
But I think for myself, um, there's that magic number around that 25 to 50 range. And then I wonder, because I have such a emphasis on spiritual practice and orthopraxy, whether it isn't better to then split off and make your ministry hyper localized to a different neighborhood or a different
mm.
people or whatever. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think yeah, it's just so easy to make it about the thoughts and the beliefs and forget that it's really Jesus says it's just really about the people.
Yeah, and I try in my ministry, always my sermons, I try to model being transparent.
Mm,
Even though I can be transparent to a fault, uh, talking about looking back at old Facebook posts, holy crap! But um, what I learned is like I don't think that my transparency. I don't think the churches I was ministering to were ready for that type of transparency.
mm,
Because we put we put pastors up on pedestals. So whenever they are human, uh, I think it scares people. Well, if he can't get this right,
mm.
if
Right,
he
right.
can't do this Christian thing right,
Mm,
there's no hope for me. And
mm,
with words like authentic being a Christian buzzword now,
mm,
and like I mean, I don't know. I think from the side of being, from being a church leader or everything, it's scary to be raw and vulnerable.
mm,
I mean, there were many times at the back of my life, and I taught like whether we're in community together or at church or whatever. Many times I wanted to tell a brother or a sister like, "Hey, I'm really struggling here,"
mm,
but I didn't because
mm,
I feared that great. How are they going to treat me when they know me?
mm.
So I think I don't know. I don't. If we figure that out as a faith community, I think we'll be a lot of churches will be healthier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it takes people just going through really hard things and as people like you and I, and there's so many others that have been through really hard stuff and they make it through, it's incumbent on us to remember those times when other people are going through things and kind of try to model a different way so that maybe, when they get through it and they're confronted with people, they can model something different as well. But I think you're right. I think it's um, for a theology and a spiritual dynamic that is rooted so fully in grace and newness, like a new person.
Yeah.
We're very fast to want to fall back into um, this idea that I always laugh because, I was raised evangelical, and there was always this idea of like, no works, right? Like it has nothing to do with anything that you do, right?
Yeah.
It's all grace. But as soon as you did something that wasn't in line with what they thought you to do, it's a very much a conversation about what you were doing, and
Yeah.
not about what God was doing in your life. So it's like,
Yeah.
well, so nothing that I can do can make my faith any better, but there are things that I can do that is going to make it a lot worse. It just didn't, it never really added up to me. The math didn't math. So,
No. No. And when you were talking, I was thinking like, with this platform, I'm always trying to tell people we all come to God. We're all coming to God limping somehow. We all have, you can see it on someone clear, whether it be a physical disability or whatever, but we all have trauma.
mm-hmm,
We're all bringing our messiness to the altar.
mm-hmm,
And I remember when I was candidating for my first pastorate, and they knew I did a lot of ministry in the recovery community.
mm-hmm,
And I'll never forget this. As someone asked me, "Well, you do a lot of ministry in the homeless community. Will those type of people come here if we hire you?" And I said, "I hope so.
yeah, right.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope." Like there's this mindset of us versus them, and I just it just like
Mm,
it just like
mm,
when we create barriers on people for any reason, we really miss an opportunity. We really miss an opportunity to show them the love of Christ.
mm-hmm,
And my wife is experiencing this now when we go visit churches. I try not to let people know I'm a pastor now,
mm,
because when people hear that word, I see pastors and their leadership team, their buttholes tighten up for some reason. so,
mm,
like just me being a pastor and trying to find a home church, like, like people put barriers up that don't need to be there. Like I don't even tell people. It's funny when a couple weeks will go by or whatever, and someone will be like, "Hey, we found you on the internet."
mm-hmm,
But like I just, the labels we put on people, uh, whatever they are, really keeps us from maybe loving someone that is so called different than us.
mm-hmm.
And and I mean, like you said, you grew up. Was your dad a pastor? I know he does missionary work, right?
Mm. He is ordained because of his missions work, but he is
Okay.
never. He's an elder now, like a
Okay.
teaching elder at the church they go to in Ohio, and he is their missions director. So
Okay.
he is those roles, but he's not. He's never been a pastor for per se.
But you
Although
you
I've always seen him that way, but
yeah, but
he's never held that position.
you grew up seeing like different type of like typical church setting to
Mm, yeah.
your your home church experience.
Hmm.
So I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I feel like there's hope for. See, I'm gonna tip my hat because I really think exotology can mess your outlook too on life. But
Oh yeah.
a couple years ago, after I did a real deep dive on exotology, I really do have a more hopeful outlook
Hmm.
on the world,
Yeah.
on how God wraps this whole thing up. So I do believe there's hope for the church. I think the church will be successful. I don't have defeatist theology. I never got the whole concept of um the church gets his butt kicked for what, thousands of years.
Yeah, and so then Jesus has to show up to save us again.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
tag, I'm
yeah,
in. Like
yeah,
so
yeah.
I do have hope. I like talking about these issues because I feel like, excuse me, I really feel like it does people's hearts good to see people who are so-called clergy
Mhm.
and been in ministry to say, hey, yeah, we know there's issues. We're not pretending like there's not
Yeah, there's not.
issues.
Right. Not putting our head in
Like
the sand.
and I feel like I, I talk to a lot of people on the deconstruction side of social media, and it's like I know it's cool right now. It seems cool even for like young Christian leaders to kind of diss the church. I'm not doing that. I don't want people to think that I'm saying, oh, throw all Christianity out of the bathtub, but I just want people to know, like, yeah, we have to talk about these issues because we want people to meet Jesus, the real Jesus, and
Hmm.
not some over politicized Americano. We love to recreate God in our image, and
Hmm.
I think that is one of the major problems. But so, do you
Yeah,
have
I
any?
was actually. Go ahead.
No, good.
We were just having this discussion yet that you talked about how our eschatology affects, and that was we were having a conversation on this on our Discord server yesterday or the day before, and that was my point. I mean, somebody was asking kind of where everybody stood because they were listening to a podcast on it, and we were all weighing in, and my point was like, I think that oddly enough, I don't find eschatology to be very useful at all, except in that it does impact the way we view the world and other people who are not um, Christians, or the way we view world events. How we vote in America, we can vote. I mean, I think it has a huge impact on how we treat people, and
Yeah.
how we
Oh
think
yeah.
things should be run. And I think that is probably for me, I agree. I was raised in a very like pre-mill dispensational mindset, and it definitely impacted. I mean, I remember sermons. I mean, talking about world events and stuff and the way that we approach them, and I mean, even then at a younger age, I thought like, man, this doesn't sound at all like Jesus.
No.
And yeah, so.
I mean, it took me years to like even say come out of the closet, but to
Mm,
to like come out as not a pre-trib rapture guy, because
mm,
after studying it for 10 plus years, I was like, I don't see this angry Jesus
mm,
that's coming back to smoke everybody. I
mm.
don't see that in the pages of scripture.
Yeah. What do you mean? I mean, I take a very like my soteriology, my atonement theology is very like rooted in Christus Victor,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like, so what do we do? What do we do with that? Like, did Jesus defeat sin and death on the cross? Because if he did, like, or did he not? Because it seems
yeah.
like you're saying he did, but then we are operating the rest of our theology like he didn't, and that
No,
he's going to actually
yeah,
do that when he comes back again.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there, yeah, I definitely do not hold those views either.
Yeah, like I just see it hurt people. Like I remember back in 2012, I knew somebody that was living in Florida that her church convinced her that the rapture was happening, so she stopped paying her bills and she
Hmm.
lost everything and had to start
Hmm.
over because of bad theology. Like
Hmm.
theology matters. Like I tell
Hmm.
people all the time, like when people say no creed but Christ. And I'm always like, well, what Christ? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like you need people, the Bible in the wrong hands. And I understand this. And I always say this: it is a sledgehammer in the wrong hands.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a right way to handle the text. Like
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to like stuff like eschatology, when I teach on it, I tell people here are the possible
Yeah.
interpretations, and I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I don't know. Like
Mm-hmm.
we debate the first 20 chapters of that one book in Revelation. It gets pretty cool in chapter 21. So
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
I just have a more hopeful,
Oh yeah.
like
Yeah. The older I get, the more inclusive to the kingdom that I mean, I read particularly like chapters 20 to 22, 23, whatever. What is there?
yeah,
22 or 23 in Revelation? 22.
yeah,
Like those chapters, man. I just tweeted out something the other day, and I was like, I think that the strongest case for universalism is in Revelations 20 and through 22. Like those gates, everybody talks about like the gates being high and closed, and I'm like, those gates are open, bud. I don't know, like I don't know what scripture you're talking about, but there's people, the murderers, the adulterers, are all on the outside of the thing, but those gates are open. It's
yeah,
and I don't know. I mean, those are all kinds of different theologies, but I think that and I also don't think that I also tend to think that the prophets, and not that they don't speak to today, like you said, those were also apocalyptic because the church was going through what seemed like an apocalypse at the time, right? Like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
like we read these like they weren't written for that day, they were written for the day that will come, and we'll
24,
all
yeah,
know it. And yeah, the 666 is spells Nero
yeah,
in code, right? Like
yeah,
um yeah, I not that it doesn't speak to today, not that it doesn't talk to a spirit of Antichrist, but I think the message of Revelation is
it's
Jesus
not talking
wins.
about
Yeah.
it's not talking about Obama or Trump or Bush
Mhm.
or how Apache helicopters. Like
Right.
I have never understood how people can't get that God uses metaphor and simile,
Mm.
and like you can say, you read that verse, how did you get Apache helicopter from that? A couple months ago I heard a pastor, and it breaks my heart. I hate when a pastor has good preaching and theology and then they say something crazy about end times. I heard a couple months ago a pastor say in a sermon that this statue of a bull that was erected in New York
Mhm.
last summer was fulfilling biblical prophecy. No, it's not.
Mhm.
No, it's
Yeah,
not.
we just all want to be special, right?
Yeah,
We want to be special. And
yeah,
that's the human need to feel like the main character, to feel like we're the ones that it's all been leading up to. And I think one of the things that age has taught me as I look at my kids come after me is that, they've got their own language, and it's ridiculous to me, but it's not to them. They've got their own styles. They think, I mean, they've said things like, I mean, they think that their music and their culture is it's what everything has been leading up to. And as a perspective, I think, oh, we thought the same thing, and our
yeah,
parents' generation thought the same thing, and it's fun to watch. There was the whole millennials versus boomer things about 10 years ago, and now it's like millennials versus millennials are realizing like, oh, we weren't. There's this generation coming after us that thinks they're better than us, and
yeah,
and and that's the nature of humanity, man.
yeah.
That's we
There's a
all we want all build towers to the sky.
there's a TikTok. Yeah, there's a TikTok account that reads the Bible in today's language to the kids, and
Oh yeah,
it's like Jesus was born with the reds.
yeah, yeah.
Like I remember back in '04 or '05, Pastor Rick uh, got me the gospel according to the four brothers, and it was the four gospels and Ebonics. And you
Mm.
could tell it was a group of white people
That wrote it.
that wrote like, this is how they talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Right.
like I always tell people with like Bible translation and everything, it's always gonna need to evolve. It's always gonna
Mm.
need to evolve. Like I'll probably be in my 70s one day screaming at the internet saying that the ESV is the right Bible. And I don't
Mm.
like all these new translations. But
Mm.
that's always been with the church. Like we
Mm.
had to continue. The gospel doesn't change, but
Mm.
the way we
The
communicate,
message doesn't change. Yeah,
no,
sure.
but we have to evolve. We have
Yeah.
to. I know as a disability rights advocate, we had the same like adapt or die. Like I think a lot of churches are. I see a lot of smaller communities dying and selling their buildings, or they're combining with other churches.
Mm.
Like I used to tell my people, like churches don't. Jesus doesn't close churches. They run out of money. There's a lot of
Mm.
churches that close with black in their account, but Jesus will close us and we stop being His heart.
Mm.
And I seen that a lot of times when like I mean I pastored a church of 30, 40, 70 people to 8 people, and
Mm.
it really comes down to a, a heart issue
Mm.
on if people come or not. I mean, you can
Mm.
have the biggest outreach budget in the world, but once they show up and they don't feel loved,
Right.
I mean that
No, absolutely.
love will make people stay.
You mean just love?
Yeah, just love. Yeah. Yeah. See, it just took me 15 years to agree with you. It just took me almost 20 years to
Yeah.
agree with you. See,
Yeah.
yeah, I finally got there. But
That's what I tell my wife all the time. Yeah, I mean, if you just stick around long enough, you'll see I'm right.
yeah, I bet you she loves that.
Yeah, I don't really tell her that. That'd be
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah. I
She'd beat
don't.
me up.
Yeah, I know. I want to be able to wake up when I go to sleep.
Yeah,
But no,
most
Nate.
nights.
Yeah. So Nate, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah.
It's good to
It's been
catch up.
yeah. We had to catch up, and but I just want to thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you for your friendship, and we've been at this for a long time now.
I know we have. So to my audience, thank you for checking us out. You know what to do. The whole YouTube stuff. Hit subscribe and follow us on the interwebs. All right, guys. Until next time, keep limping for Jesus. God bless.
Bye, guys.
All right.